Hello, Internet. We are back from Fight Island. Well, I am. This was going to be a panel today, but the Dirt Road Junglist and Eric, they both had things come up at the last minute, and I need to get these thoughts out of my head. It's Neil coming with you. Usually when I do these solo ones, I have a edited script. But today, I'm just going from my notes that was going to drive the panel discussion. I'm going in live, and I'm here to talk to you today about weight cutting in combat sports, particularly, but not limited to MMA. But I'm not going to take the regular angle that you often see on this, that, something needs to be done. I have a different take on this. We were going to talk about our experiences, but we're going to narrow down. I'm going to narrow down the focus to my own particular background from as a judo coach. I have cut weight myself. I also have good access to medical professionals. So I have some perspectives on these different practices from their end. And in my capacity as a judo coach, I have done seminars with professional dietitians who specialize in sport and who have backgrounds in combat sports themselves. Now, why am I here? Why am I talking to you? Why am I filling your ears with this stuff about weight cutting today? Well, there's two current events in MMA that got this into my head, which was, made me figure that this was the time to come out and say a thing or two, to get these thoughts, again, out of my head, out onto the internet. Number one, Patchy Mix this week, he was fighting in Ryzen. Missed weight horribly, embarrassed himself, and this got people talking a little bit about, was there something wrong with him? Did he have a bad weight cut? Was he depleted? And Patchy Mix, a few years ago during the Sean O'Malley era, under my rankings, he was the number one fighter in that weight class in the whole world, the number one bantamweight. And he's looking like a ghost. He's been looking like a ghost of his former self for years, and his decline has been continuing. Does weight cutting have something to do with that? I don't know. It's hard to say, but it got us in our chats talking about weight cutting again. Number two, we just had Islam Makhachev set the UFC winning streak record, 17 fights last night it's Sunday the 16th of August right now. Last night, Makhachev had the strong, complicated performance against Ian Machado Gary, but Ian Machado Gary was the first full-sized welterweight grappler or someone with a grappling base that Makhachev had ever fought. This was his first test against a real, proper welterweight grappler, and it was a tough fight. Both of them had their moments. Makhachev came away with the W, but this was an example of Makhachev cutting less weight. He wasn't, cutting off a limb to make 155 anymore, and he's still performing at an elite level at 170. So, just to get everybody on the same level, get everybody on the same page, I'm going to quickly go through what weight cutting involves. When a fighter, whether it's in MMA, boxing, judo, wrestling, those are the four sports that do and BJJ, those are the five sports that do the most weight cutting and weight management. It's very common in solo sports that have weight classes. There's three phases. There's the preparatory phase, which involves diet. Then there's the cut, and then there's the replenishment phase. Now, diet is caloric restriction in weeks leading up to the event. This is where you see, I remember Kenny Florian used to make a big thing about eating wild caught salmon. He's no carbs in the week leading up to it, up to his fight. Things like this. Athletes tend to become very narrow and very focused in what they eat. When I was cutting weight for judo, the most I ever did was like 11 pounds in a week. I'd be going to eating no salt. I'd be eating brown rice, lean pork, that kind of thing. Uh, Eric had some notes from a world-class grappler, and the grappler in question, to make weight for ADCC tier competitions, he starts his dieting phase 3 weeks out, which is fairly typical. None of the fighters who I've cornered in MMA have had a lot of difficulty cutting weight, but they're also not cutting. They never cut a ton of weight for their fights. The fighters are always trying to strike a balance in the dieting phase between eating enough to be able to train properly and achieving the caloric restriction to knock a few more pounds off in that time. So phase 1, diet, caloric management. Phase 2 is the actual cut itself, and this is water depletion. The cut also includes things like, making sure that you've pooped all the poop out of you so that you weigh that much less. But the cut, for the most part, is going to be about dehydrating. The main ways that this happens, number one, is the overlap with the diet, and this is electrolyte tinkering. Ronda Rousey used to talk about this all the time, where she, X days out from the fight, she starts eating tons and tons of salt. She really liked pretzels for this, and then goes to 0 salt, 0 sodium. And it's very difficult to get that low in sodium. You have to do a lot of really careful work about looking at what you eat. Like, there's some weird things like frozen green beans. They weirdly have more salt than you would want to eat. Bread has a lot of salt on its own. Things don't have flavor either, so you're finding tricky ways like throwing lemon on everything just to have any taste. You can't use hot sauce because that's full of salt. And this electrolyte tinkering, mostly with the sodium, but it can happen you can do it with other electrolytes too. By cutting it out, your body starts to shed a lot of water really fast over a couple days. You just sort of pee it all out. The other thing that people do to lose this weight at the last minute is they sweat. They stop drinking water. They start sitting in the sauna. They start wearing sweatsuits, which, you tape garbage bags to your body. The way I got the water out for my bigger weight cut that I did, the way that I did this was with sweatsuits. So I'm wearing garbage bags. I'm lifting, throwing mats around, and I'm just trying to sweat my balls off to get the last amount of water out of my body. People go well beyond this, though. A very popular method is to take an extremely hot bath and you saturate that bath with Epsom salts. I've seen video of fighters throwing acetone and solvents into the baths as well. And by getting into a bath like this, where there's a lot of Epsom salts or solvents or whatever, your body at that heat tries to sweat, and because the sweat doesn't evaporate, the sweat doesn't cool you, so your body thinks it needs to put more sweat out. If you've ever had the experience of being at 100% relative humidity on a hot day, that's upwards of 30 Celsius, 35 Celsius, that really thick, muggy experience where you just can't get cool when you're outside, you're craving the air conditioning, the dehumidified, recirculated, processed air. That's the experience, but they're exploiting the body's tendency to behave in this way, and making the response as dramatic as possible, so the body just essentially dumps all of the water out of the body into the bathtub. Then you towel off, and you can watch videos of Chris Cyborg or somebody going through cycles of into the hot bath, into the towels, into the hot bath, into the towels, until the desired weight is achieved. DRJ had an anecdote that she was going to share about a coworker who was in his 50s, tried to win a Biggest Loser competition at work by doing a high school style wrestling cut, by doing this kind of thing, and he got very sick. And that's because this weight cut, this deliberate dehydration, is extremely dangerous. It's dangerous in a first order sense of you're messing up the balance of your body. When electrolytes get out of whack like this, if you're in the hospital or something, the doctors are going, "Oh, that's bad. Your sodium's getting too low, your potassium's getting too low." Well, when all of those things get out of whack as this weight cutting procedure, you can get really sick really quick. The other thing is that dehydration is bad. It's also very, very hard on the kidneys. It can cause long-term damage, but can also cause immediate death. We don't want people to be hydrated. We want the water in the body. So obviously, if we want athletic performance, we shouldn't be incentivizing people to dehydrate themselves in this way. This is where a lot of the discussion around weight cutting, we have to do something about this weight cutting, this is where it comes from. And we think about video of, Aspen Ladd collapsing on the scale and things like this. It's very bad. We don't want anybody to die. And there's the second order level of danger, other than the risks of dehydration itself, is that if you have less water in your body, you have a thinner layer of cerebrospinal fluid, and you become more susceptible to brain damage and knockouts. So the cut is dangerous, it makes the fight more dangerous, and it inhibits performance, is the theory. It theoretically could also inhibit an athlete's performance. Now, finally, the third phase of the weight cut is you get on the scale, you get the thumbs up from the commission, you get the thumbs up from the tournament director, if it's BJJ or whatever, and you need to replenish. You need to get, now, as quickly as possible, get calories into your body. You need to get water into your body. Lots of people drink things like coconut water, which has potassium. It starts giving you those electrolytes back. Eating a peanut butter and marmalade sandwich, simple carbs, lots of water. And you want to, if you're doing something like a judo tournament, you're often trying to strike a balance between, you're trying to strike a balance between, I wasn't eating last night. I want to, make sure that I have enough energy, enough glycogen in my body to be able to go literally fight people right now. But I also might have to fight in an hour. So how much can I eat in this time? How much can I drink so I don't throw up on the mat? You throw up on the mat, you're DQ'd. You're out for the day. So there's always this balance on what you're going to be doing for replenishment. In MMA, what fighters did until USADA, and whether or not this is the case now, it's actually a little fuzzy to me, but they used to use IVs, and then they started doing things when USADA was testing for, they would test for IV use by looking for plastics in the bloodstream, because you have all of these polyurethane hoses, this medical hose, they leave trace amounts of the plastic, and you can test for the plastic. Then they started using these entirely glass setups to try to dump as much water back into their bodies as possible. Chris Weidman was actually really notorious for using IVs to rehydrate. And, theoretically, this is a good way to solve these other problems. And, if we're talking about spherical cows in a frictionless vacuum, yeah, an IV is a great way to rehydrate somebody. You can put glucose back into their bloodstream. If somebody comes in dehydrated and depleted to an ER, for example, this is what they're going to do. But we're not talking about elite athletic. We're talking about elite athletic performance in this case. And if you're starting to have to do something where either you're putting needles into yourself to rehydrate to be able to perform because your weight cut was so drastic, or where it has to be supervised by a nurse, maybe it's time to start rethinking about how much weight you're taking off. So that's weight cutting in a nutshell. There's a lot more discourse about it, but those are the main things you have to understand is the process. There's the diet process, there's the water cut process, and there's the replenishment. Each one of these phases has its own internal problems. Now, when I was thinking about this, as somebody who's been coaching BJJ, coaching judo, hanging out at BJJ gyms watching MMA, cornering people for MMA for years and years and years now. There are 4 solutions to weight cutting that I've heard floated over and over again. And this was the part where I wanted to have a panel, because we all have, as we've said before, we're the old people as far as MMA fans go. We're people who have been participating in combat sports since the 90s. We've been watching, since single-digit UFCs. And we've heard these solutions over and over and over again. And every time somebody floats one of these 4 solutions, they float it as if they just thought of it. And it's like, hey guys, I have this one neat trick. This one neat trick will solve the weight cutting. No more Aspen lad falling off on the scale, passing out on the scale. No more unfair, Glycine T-bows cutting so much. We have these 4 solutions, okay? I'm going to list all of these common solutions, and then I'm going to talk about why they don't work, okay? So number 1 is more weight classes, and this is, ostensibly emulating boxing, and this would be adding, Franklin weight, which was 195, or Felder weight, which was 165, or Felder weight would probably have been 162.5, but adding more intermediary weight classes so that fighters don't have to cut as far. Number 2 is same-day weigh-ins. Number 3 is a secondary weigh-in with an in-ring limit. Boxing does do this as well. And number 4 is the hydration testing, or urine-specific gravity testing, which is something that ONE FC kind of does. And very often I hear people say something along the lines of, well, it works for one, they should just make that everywhere. Okay. So again, the 4 common solutions: more weight classes, same-day weigh-ins, secondary weigh-ins with an in-ring limit, or hydration testing by doing urine-specific gravity analysis. Specific gravity is the urine density. They have like the pee guy. You give the guy the pee and he dips the thing and he gives thumbs up, thumbs down. Okay. Now, I'll walk through why these 4 solutions aren't actual practical solutions for solving these issues. Now, number 1 is the more weight classes. And the problem with adding more weight classes is that rather than causing people to cut less, it causes different people to cut more. Now, what do I mean by this? So I'll use Franklin weight at the 195 as the example. Rich Franklin, it's called Franklin weight after Rich Franklin. Was he the 3rd? I think he was the 3rd UFC middleweight champion, okay? Now, he always said that he was just murdering himself to make 185. He wanted this 195 weight class, and he fought against Dan Henderson there, and he did a few fights at this 195 catch weight, which got nicknamed Franklin weight because he always wanted to book it. And his theory was if he could fight at 195, and Paul Felder said similar things about a 160X weight class, then that would be less weight cutting. But all that this does is it shifts the window of who makes what weight class. Rich Franklin starts to make 195 comfortably, but now you start having... So Franklin, he makes 195 now, but then you might have someone like Rogerio Nogueira, who never in a million jillion years would have been able to make 185, but he starts looking at 195 like, maybe that's now in reach. So if he starts doing the weight cut that Rich Franklin used to do, Rogerio, and I chose Rogerio because he's from the same era. Now, Rogerio is the one doing the big weight cut. You haven't actually reduced the amount of weight being cut. You haven't made it so that athletes, broadly speaking, aren't cutting weight anymore. You haven't eliminated the practice. You've just changed. You made it so that a few of these specific athletes are cutting a little bit less, and now other athletes are thinking, well, maybe if I cut a little bit more, I'll get that performance edge by being the bigger, stronger guy. Now, boxing, people will point out, though, has a lot more weight classes. If we're looking at the welterweight area, where, the welterweight size fighters, we're talking weight classes every 6 or 7 pounds. If we get down into like the bantamweight zone, they're like 3 pounds difference in these weight classes. Now, there's two things with this. We'll set aside the problem that boxing weight classes are a confusing mess. Like junior middleweight is the same as super welterweight. It depends on who's. It's a lot. That on its own is a whole different kettle of fish that we're not going to worry about today. The thing with boxing, though, is that it's not grappling. There is wrestling in boxing. You're going to be, leaning on people and pushing them around, but the weight is a smaller difference, and the weight at these ranges is a bit of a smaller difference, and so it's not incurring as big of an advantage. You can't, wrestle somebody down and sit on them and use your weight advantage, your strength advantage in the same way. The clinches, they get broken up, especially under modern refereeing practices. So there's less in-sport advantage to having that weight advantage than there is in BJJ, wrestling, or MMA, or judo. So more weight classes won't stop the cutting, okay? It'll just change who's cutting, and you need to look at other grappling sports for that rather than comparing to striking sports. Number 2, same-day weigh-ins. Same-day weigh-ins are also a very, very bad idea, because that's going to just mean that we have, by same-day weigh-ins, this means that you weigh in, and then instead of going overnight to replenish, you have 6 hours. You weigh in the morning, 9 in the morning, you fight in the afternoon, prelims start in the afternoon. You have 12 hours, 6 to 12 hours. The problem with this now, well, there's 2 problems. Okay? Number 1 is that it means that you have a different rehydration window depending on where on the card you are. Okay? So the prelim fighters, the commission's not going to run weigh-ins for 7 hours. You can barely get the commission to do their job as it is. Because if you have, say, a 7-hour UFC card or a 5-hour UFC card, they're not going to sit there at the scale for 5 hours. You need to be there at 9 a.m. or 11 a.m., get on the scale, go do your thing. So that on its own, it's impractical. The other reason that same-day weigh-ins don't work is because you're just crushing that replenishment window. It means that you're going to have fighters who are more depleted going into the ring, perhaps still dehydrated. And fighters are dumb. Like, no offense to the fighters out there, but I often say, what's a judo black belt? Well, it's someone who is too stupid to quit. The fighters who are cutting weight are still going to be pushing for this advantage. And my evidence of this is people cut weight for judo tournaments, for local BJJ tournaments, even if they have these shorter replenishment windows, shorter rehydration, shorter recovery windows from the weight cut. When we're dealing with the world championship level activities, and people do these big weight cuts in wrestling as well, same day weigh-ins. So it doesn't stop the practice, just means people are going out depleted, and remember, if they're dehydrated, they're more likely to get severe brain damage, more likely to get concussions from the striking as well. So same-day weigh-ins, they don't solve the problem, they just make the dangers of the problem worse. Now, number 3 was the secondary weigh-in with the in-ring limit. Out of the common solutions, this one is the one that, if we're looking at our spherical cows in the frictionless vacuum, this is the one that's probably the most practical. But it also involves the commissions getting involved and giving a damn. So the idea here would be that if you're fighting at 170 pounds, you really can only, when you go to the cage, you can't be above, hypothetically, 182. Right? That would be like 8% of the body mass. So you're not cutting more than 8%. The problem, though, again, is that fighters will just enter the cage depleted. People do point out that this comes up in boxing as well. Sometimes with boxing, you'll see that the fight contract, the fight agreement says that boxer X can't enter the ring at more than Y, or they have to weigh in the next day and be no more than Y. Again, boxing tends to do smaller weight cuts, and importantly, boxers are allowed to negotiate their own fight agreements in a way that MMA fighters aren't. So this becomes less of a practice about safety or advantages. It becomes safety or in-ring advantages. It becomes yet another thing in the negotiations for advantages between the boxers themselves. So boxer A will say, well, you can't rehydrate. You can't come in more than 8 pounds above the weigh-in. And then his opponent comes back and says, well, I want a smaller ring then. Okay, well, why don't we go with this ring and we'll make it 10 pounds? So it's a negotiation between the camps. It's something that has no applicability to the current state of MMA. Now, number 4 is the P testing. The fact that it's funny, we'll put that aside. There's 2 big problems with it. Number 1 is it has proven laughably easy to cheat. Okay. It is laughably easy to cheat at this. There is a video of a Australian researcher. He's an actual university researcher, not just some dude who's saying some shit, demonstrating that he can pass the test. He sits in a sauna. You can watch him do this in the video. He sits in the sauna, he loses the weight, and then he walks over and he pees in the cup and he passes the test. And he goes through this about, he explains how he does it. And the reason that he had made all of this public is that fighters from One had contacted him about, hey, help me pass this test. The second problem with it from as a solution to weight cutting in elite MMA is that human bodies are, they're individual, right? Different people will give different results on this. And sometimes there are fighters who report that they didn't actually cut weight at all and they still failed the test. It is erratic. It is not as objective as one would say. And that's because this test that they're using isn't a test to see if somebody has dehydrated themselves intentionally. It's the kind of test that they use in the hospital when they're looking to see if they need to tinker with somebody's IVs, when they're somebody who is there for, say, congestive heart failure, that kind of thing. The test is not a good test for determining if somebody has deliberately dehydrated themselves. It's not that specific. It's not that granular. And so it gives bad results. And all of that aside, the other, a third big problem with it is it's very complicated. It's not something that you can have at, Barn Fights, Iowa. It's not something that you can have at a local wrestling meet. It's not something that you can implement in combat sports broadly, because remember, elite combat sports aren't combat sports. They're a part of combat sports. And weight cutting happens at all levels of combat sports. And this brings me to kind of my thesis statement. What do we actually do about this? Well, weight cutting isn't a procedural problem. It is a cultural problem. And you don't solve cultural problems with new rules and regulations and with new procedures. If you think about how weight cutting gets discussed when you're watching UFC event and Rogan and DC are going on about a fighter, oh, look, he's so huge for the weight class. He's so big. Well, that's praising the fighter for cutting a lot of weight, because weight cutting is professionalism. Right? Weight cutting is a sign of being legit and doing things properly in the real way. Weight cutting is performative seriousness and performative commitment to the sport and to the practice. And I'm using performative not as a doesn't mean it's fake, Performative is a word from linguistics by a linguist named J.L. Austin, which means it's something symbolic, and Austin's using this in terms of speech, but it's been extended to a lot of other applications. This idea, where you say the thing and it makes it true, right? It's not reporting this other thing has happened. The speech is the thing, and so the simplest example is a promise. When I say I promise I will do this, that's not me reporting that I'm making a promise. The promise, the words themselves are the promise. And so getting on the scale and cutting weight, and cutting lots of weight, that is showing that you are a serious fighter who does serious fight things, that you are a serious wrestler, that you are serious about BJJ. And that is the kernel of the problem right there. Just to put a nail in this, if you've seen the movie Foxcatcher, about the American wrestlers, about the Schultz brothers and the murder of Dave Schultz. Sorry, I had to sort out Mark and Dave in my head. There's this scene where the film language is going through Mark Schultz's. The movie is about Mark Schultz and his pathway to the top of being, going to the Olympics and yada. But there's a point where he's having a lot of, psychological problems about this. And he tries to self-sabotage at this one point by, he doesn't want to be at the meet. And Dave comes in and finds Mark is just like, he's eating like 12 pounds of candy bars. And he's just like, I can't, I'm done, man. It's all over. And the film language, the way that it works in the plot is that it shows how supportive Dave is to his brother and helps him find that dedication. And they get him to cut the weight. He puts on the sweatsuit he gets on the bike, and he, the exercise bike, and he burns off all of those calories and he makes weight and he wins the tournament. And it's this thing in the film language that is symbolically shows how dedicated he is and shows how hard he works. And that's where weight cutting is in the minds of people who are doing it and the expectations of the fans. As the commentary booths, they're kind of talking out of the sides of their mouth when they on one side say weight cutting is bad, but then they praise a fighter, and not even always praising, but they talk about how intimidating a fighter is for being that big. Right? They always used to say this about Gleison Tebow. Oh, I don't know how he makes 155, man. He's so huge. Even if has negative connotations, they're making him sound scary. What do fighters want to be? Fighters want to be tough. They want to be scary. They want to be serious. Okay. So if we want to change weight cutting, if we want this to end, we need to stop looking at elite fighters. Okay? We need to stop looking for commissions to change the rules. We certainly need to stop looking to the UFC because they're not going to do anything for fighter safety. Instead, the glance needs to go to amateur wrestling, particularly low-level amateur wrestling, and also to BJJ, because these are the two main places that people learn to weight cut, where they start getting in the practice. To use a phrase that gets thrown around a lot now, the Overton window needs to shift to reduce the amount of weight that's acceptable for someone to shift to cut for wrestling, and it needs to be something that people no longer regard as normal, because this is how people die, right? This is how people die in combat sports. Is more often, almost all the deaths are connected to cutting too much weight or standing 8 counts if we bring boxing in, because what's normal at the lowest level is what's normal at every level. And we saw this weekend that Makhachev was able to beat the top contender in his division, the top non-injured contender in a division that he moved up into And he's cutting less weight now. It's not the panacea. It's not necessarily a big advantage. We can think of how many times have we seen fighters, this is where it'd been really nice to have a panel, where they reinvent themselves to go down in weight, and they just look like dog shit in their new weight class, right? James Irvin is the one who I think of for this, right? Like James Irvin had been fighting at light heavyweight for how long? He got knocked out by Anderson Silva at light heavyweight. And he goes down to middleweight and he looks like a skeleton. Dan Hooker did this recently, right? And none of these people had career resurgences. It was just a new way of them proving to themselves and to others that they were serious, real fighters. Okay. Well, that's what I have for the day. I have a spin-off talk from this that I have in the oven right now, thinking about the crisis of eating disorders in sport. I hope that will be coming before too long. This is Neil for Punch Sport Pagoda. You can find me on B-Sky, showing off my new knives that I made at weekendwarrior.bsky.social. Talk to you soon.